In our last video, we completed the basic scenery and roadway details for this section of the layout here. And what we're going to do in this video is keep moving on into the lower industrial yard area. And we'll just pan through slowly here. I'm going to speak to each area that we've worked on here with some close-ups after this overview. This is about 3 months work. I realized in June that half the year had gone by and I was nowhere near closer to finishing my goal of getting the basic ground cover done for the layout before the end of the year. So I got cracking, and this corner of the layout here is the result of 3 months of work, a couple hours here, a couple hours there, in between other jobs. The first area that I took on here was the grassy area in front of the backdrop building. Very simple job, just using static grass, but first making sure we had the walkways and steps painted in a nice concrete color. There's a little walkway that runs beside the building. I'll show you a close-up of that. Fairly straightforward. You'll notice the buildings, of course, are all level, but the roadway is going down at a slight grade, so there's quite a difference in elevation here, the grassy area, as compared to this area that's pretty much level. Here's a bit of a close-up of this area. The area around the back here was a bit of a challenge because the plaster underneath the grass here had cracked quite a bit, so there was quite a bit of touch-up work needed before we can get around to planting the grass and doing the painting. The next bit of work was painting the asphalt. There's quite a bit of it in this industrial area between the crossing here, adjoining the area we finished in the last video, and the end of the drive that takes you into the truck transfer facility. I wanted to give an impression of asphalt of different ages and repair jobs over time, and you can see I think I've achieved that with some repair sections here and throughout a number of different shades of asphalt, identifying where perhaps the major route is for through traffic versus lighter shades that are strictly older parking lot areas. Also managed to show the repairs done over time to the crossing, so a little bit darker asphalt there through the crossing areas. And it's quite simple to do this. Every time I mixed up a different batch of paint, quite by chance, just mixing up black, white, and something called asphalt, which gives the color a slightly warmer look. This is the paint that I use. It's called asphaltum. There you go, Americana acrylic paint. A few drops of that when you're mixing in the white and the black, and it gives it a much warmer feel, which is good for asphalt. And there's also a section at the back here where I experimented with using some very, very fine grit sandpaper to actually sand down the painted area, and it gives it kind of a dusty look. So altogether, I'd say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, maybe 9 different random mixes of paint. And when I ran out of paint, I just created another batch and slightly different mix each time. These areas here that are newer represent recently repaved sections. I used masking tape to get nice straight edges so that it looks like it was a clean repair job. Haven't decided yet whether I'll I'll put line painting through this area to delineate the middle section there. That's where the trucks and other vehicles should be using versus parking areas in the lighter shades. We'll see. And here's a bit of a close-up. You can see the different shades of asphalt. Occasionally a small detail, and there's a small repair. This is just a base coat, so over time I will probably come back and add additional details, additional repair spots, perhaps even get some decals of manhole covers, give it more and more detail as I go. There's a view of that sanded area, which, since it's adjacent to a gravel road, I thought would be more appropriate to look a bit dusty. The next job that I tackled was the grain elevator along the back. It's a very large structure. It serves as a backdrop as well as an active industry. May not look like much was done, but if you look back on previous videos, you'll see I've added the decals for ADM that come with the kit. I chose ADM because I like the logo. I've seen a lot of the cars, the ADM cars, and in fact I've ordered some of the new Walters grain cars to go along with it. So felt that gave it a nice touch. The building itself is yet to be weathered. Not sure whether I'll go with a concrete wash to tone down the bright white. There are prototypes that are bright white, but it does need a toning down. So that's to come. But what I had to do here is less to do with the building itself, but more to do with the track. And we'll talk about that next. Now, if you look closely at the loading shed, you'll see that it's sitting on about a 3/8 inch concrete foundation. And the reason I did this is because when I built the tracks, in fact most of the layout, I went ahead and put all the track, almost all the track on a cork road bed. What that did in this case was raise the track higher than the building that was sitting next to it, so that the loading shed was basically sitting on the ballast, and that's just not the way it works. So I had to actually raise the entire kit all the way from one end to the other, all the way from the back down to here, so that the base of the building, where the doorway is here, was roughly at the top of the railhead, so that there is a small step here, mind you, so that when you're walking out of the building, you're roughly in the right height to work in and about the loading area. So piece of styrene here to act as a concrete foundation, bits of styrene on this side and on the back side, and the whole industry lifted, and then some ballast filling in the edges here. All in all, it looks a whole lot better than it did before when the shed was just sitting on the ballast. It's not prototypic. It didn't look well at all. So this was a bit of a job, using some spare cork and some particle board to raise the entire industry. I guess it's a lessons learned. Before you go ahead and build your layout, have a think about where the tracks go in relation to loading docks, loading doors. There are one or two examples in the layout where I did actually build sidings without ballast, because it was clearly obvious that they had to go inside a building at the right height. But I hadn't done it here, but no harm done. It just was more work after the fact to raise the building and get it to fit. One of the other things to keep in mind when you're working on the layout after you've laid your track and ballasted, and you're concerned about what damage you might do to the layout when you crawl over it to finish parts of the layout that are out of reach, or they're in a corner near a backdrop, is to have a piece of something soft, basically. This is leftover underpad from some carpeting work that we had done years ago. I've always kept a roll of it handy so that I can throw it over the layout and then crawl over it on my belly when I have to reach something that's 3 or 4 feet away, as this corner of the layout was. So before, obviously, what you see in the foreground was there. You always have to work from the wall to the front of the layout. So before all this beautiful detail work was added just recently, I was crawling on the layout using the foam to access these points, to do the lifting of the building, to do the static grass, etc. at the far reaches of the layout. So good to have something to crawl on that doesn't damage the layout. And working my way back from the grain elevators towards the front of the layout, I realized I needed a service roadway for railway employees to access the turnouts here along the yard ladder. And so I built a narrow road using again some scrap ballast to bring it up to level, which also creates ditches on either side for some static grass. But I wanted to try something different here that would give me a more realistic roadway surface material, because I knew it had to be a gravel road. It wasn't a dirt road as I've tried to build before, so I couldn't use earth. I wanted something that really looked like a gravel road. So I turned to the prototype and looked for something that would approximate limestone gravel road. And lo and behold, limestone is exactly what I found to use. Limestone screenings come in 30 kilo bags, it's about 66 pounds, and with only 2 sifter screens, it's possible to create 2 sizes of stones that can be very useful for model railroading. The finer one is a mixture of ballast size and smaller powder that is very effective for making roads, and if you wash out the powder you can even use it as ballast itself. The actual screening look like that. I'm sure you've seen that before if you've done any gardening outside. A very useful product for $6 or $7 a bag. Here's a bit of a close-up, giving you an idea of how the color really looks good. And I managed to get some tire ruts in it. What you do is when you apply it just like ballast, so as it's starting to harden, you can run a vehicle, an HO scale vehicle, up and down the road, and it'll create ruts and smooth out areas that look like tire tracks. Now, when I came to the end of the yard ladder here, I realized I need to go somewhere from there. I don't want the road to end just there. So I thought I need to have a crossing here. So I created a crossing here, and I'll show you in a minute what I used for that. But I also extended the road around the tail track for the grain switcher parking area. And this road swings around the track and winds its way between the buildings, provides access to the door and staircase to the offices, as well as the door on the back of that support building for the grain terminal. So all this was done with this limestone that you buy at your neighborhood Home Depot or Lowe's. Now these crossings, these are actually a product from Woodland Scenics. Realistic looking grade crossing, wood plank grade crossings. They come in pre-cut pieces like that. They're 2 boards long, 4 boards wide to fit in between the tracks, and you also get 2 pieces like this that are notched so they fit over the tie plates, ends of the ties like that. What I did here is I basically cut it in half to make it only 1 board length long, and it fits perfectly between these 2 turnouts. And there was enough in the kit for me to use way over here. So again, I'm going to cut this off, and it'll be a single board crossing here. I'll shave this piece here in the middle, slide it in there, and we'll have a lovely crossing to connect to this road that was built some time ago, but never actually scenic. So this will be part of the next phase of the layout, scenery work. And then there's that crossing. It's been waiting forever to be added to the layout. So I'll have enough to build that crossing there to connect with that road. So we'll have access points all around for company vehicles. There's the back side of the kit so you can get an idea of the dimensions, how it might work on your layout. Now, one thing I will mention is that they come pre-colored, right? It's meant to look like wood, but frankly it was a dark, almost, you know, dining room table kind of wood look, so not at all appropriate for something that's been out in the real world getting weathered. So I simply painted it with mud colored paint, and it approximates a worn out wood dusted over with limestone dust. And here's a bit of a close-up. I think you can make out the vehicle tire ruts that I managed to get into the material as it was hardening. Now, to the left here is another one of those industries that I'm going to have to deal with the height. Again, I did manage, you can see the actual building was raised by the height of the Cork roadbed. So the building itself is actually sitting at a good height, but what I'm going to have to do is raise the working area in between here with a filler of some kind so that it matches the road and it doesn't look like the track is, you know, 3 feet higher than the working surface inside the industry. With the roadways in place, I started to fill in the spaces between the track and the road with different mixes of static grass, and even put a few tufts of grass to look like weeds between the tracks, and that will eventually continue down throughout the balance of the yard. But I didn't want to have everything looking the same color, so as we swing around through the curved area of the track leads, you'll see that I mixed in, we'll get to that in a second, we mixed in some taller, darker grasses to indicate perhaps that there's some water present, and give it a bit more texture rather than one solid short grass look to it. So you can see along the back where there's ditching, there's taller, darker green grasses, and randomly spaced between the 3 tracks, taller grasses along with the lighter grass. And then with the open spaces that I had, I thought, well, why not try and have a little bit of a pond and give more than just grass, you know, a little point of interest in the middle of the yard. And so this worked out quite well. I had to chisel out into the base plywood about an eighth of an inch to 3/16 of an inch of depth to be able to pour the realistic water and have that harden nicely. At the same time, I wanted to add some feature vegetation, and what I did was I got these cattails, which don't look too bad. I'll show you a close-up in a moment. And they come in 24 to a pack. Probably could have used a whole lot more, but I tried 2 different methods of installing these. One, pre-drill holes in the asphalt and install them before the water. Well, you have to install them before the water either way, but these I had pre-drilled holes, set them in and poured the water. These lonely guys here, I didn't pre-drill them, but I used tweezers to hold them in place as I was pouring the water. So the water's effectively hardened around it and is holding it up, and that worked fine. But where I had quite a few of them over here, I pre-drilled holes, very tightly spaced holes, and then around the water hole area, again with the taller green grasses to indicate, you know, that there's plenty of water, even though you don't see the water, you know, open, but you know, not far below the surface, there's lots of moisture, so you see those taller green grasses all around that area, and the same thing for this little pond over here, surrounding it is some deeper greens, longer green reeds, and then eventually fades out to lighter grass. So I thought this worked out quite well. We still get the mirror effect, which is quite nice, and when a locomotive is passing by, you'll probably see a bit of its reflection in the water. So quite pleased with the way that turned out. Here's a bit of a close-up view of the track around the outside of the yard. You can see the different color grasses, different length of grasses. And again, it's good to mix things up, so you'll see there's tufts of taller grasses, darker grasses mixed in with the lighter grasses. You don't want it to be too uniform. But the suggestion here is that this whole end of the yard has got a high water table, which is why these grasses are growing up between the tracks and not only in these ponding areas here. So you can see that it kind of makes sense from a groundwater perspective. And the cattails don't look too bad, even close up. Well, fresh on the success of using the limestone screenings for road surfaces, I thought, well, let's see if it might be also useful for a large industrial application. So we have here our gas distributor, and I've used the same limestone screenings, applied like ballast but tamped down a little bit so it gives you a flat surface for the entire internal roadway or surface area of the industry. Many of these gas company industries aren't paved, and they're just crushed stone. So that is what I've tried to emulate here, and I don't think it came out too bad after all. One of the things I had to do for this particular industry, similar to what I had to do for the grain terminal, is I had to raise the entire level to match the level of the track. And to do that meant 3/8 of an inch almost a half an inch at the worst spot here, because there was actually a dip in the benchwork here, unfortunately. But you can see that it varied, from maybe a 1/4 inch on this corner to almost a half an inch here, and then it went back to a 1/4 inch there. So this whole area had to be leveled, and I did that by filling it with masonite and then using some drywall mud, sanding it, getting it close to level. It didn't have to be perfect because I knew I was going to be adding the stone afterwards, but all in all, it didn't look too bad. So I'll give you some close-ups of that in just a moment. And you can see we also managed to take advantage of the increase here by creating ditches along the road, where again there's those pesky long grasses that like to hang out wherever water might be. So ditches are a favorite place for those to grow up, and then the other kinds of grass a little further away from the ditches. Also gives you an opportunity to define the entranceway, where at some point we'll have to have some chain link fence for this industry, as it is a very sensitive product that they're handling. There's a bit of a close-up. You see it from perspective from the street. As you're driving in, see the side of the building. And there's all the piping for the propane tanks, the pump houses. What I did is I pre-marked the areas where these would go, so that I'd know afterwards that they fit properly. So there's some sections where there's no stone at all, but I had marked it out with pencil and only put glue down where I wasn't going to have these buildings. So when it came time to reassemble it, everything fit perfectly where it needed to be. Now you'll see there's a couple of spots here that I also left out. In fact, these are dug in to the surface a little deeper, and there's 2 of them because these are where the loading stands go for the tank cars. So I've purchased the GLX Scale Models tank car unloading tower kit, and these are really beautiful, very, very finely made, laser cut, exquisite detail. There's lots and lots of instructions with photos. Everything's numbered, so I don't think I'll screw it up. The nice thing about this kit is it comes 2 per package. It's a bit daunting at first when you look at it. This is all that comes with it. This is the entire kit. So there's a few bits of wire, but basically the entire kit is here on these 2 sheets. So there's 2 of each of these because there's two kits, but this is basically everything to make one of these towers, and it's extremely thin cardstock that is pre-cut. Right, it's all done by laser, and all you need is a very sharp hobby knife and something that applies a tiny amount of glue. And there's even jigs in here to hold all the pieces straight while you glue them together. So I've read through the instructions once. I'm going to read it through again before I actually start building these, but I think these will look really cool. Nice forefront detail in front of the tank cars. Here's a bit of a close-up of the gas supply company. You can see how the limestone screenings look really good, like crushed stone driveway. And the tanks are going to look nice there. Once I get them all glued in, they're just temporarily set there. And like I said before, we'll have a frost fence with gates that'll go around the entire track area. And we'll probably even have an emergency exit set of gates here at the back that carried the stone out towards the road. One of the benefits of this limestone screenings is you could use it also for the edges and the shoulders of the road. So that's exactly what I've done here on both sides of the road. I've added the shoulders, and it wasn't until I got to this last piece here, you can see it's a little straighter, that I realized, hey, I should be using painter's tape to make a fine line on the edge of the road. So one area I have a straight line, the rest of the areas all done by eye, with a lot of brushing and scraping. The road has to be painted anyway, so you know, I will touch up as I go. Don't think it came out too bad though. But you live and learn, right? Now I know for the rest of the road, use frog tape. That's the next section to be done. Wish me luck. So there's a footnote here. While I was mixing paints and testing out different shades of asphalt, I went back along the area that we completed in the last video and applied a few random repair spots to the asphalt just to give it that lived-in look. And again, I'll probably come back and continue to do that over time. You don't want everything to look too perfect, so